All right, part 2 of episode 4 of I Just Clocked Off. We're talking about parity now. We already went through the Achilles injuries part of the equation. Now we're going to talk about the parity and whether parity is actually being enforced, whether by Achilles injuries or not. We're going to address both of those parts of the question. So if you look at the history of the NBA is a very top-heavy league. Typically you have, you have a handful of teams that have won most of the titles in the NBA, in the history of the NBA. The Lakers and the Celtics are obviously the biggest ones. You also have the Spurs, who have had their awesome run with Duncan and Parker and Ginobili. They won 5 championships. The Rockets have a couple. The Sixers have a couple. It's a lot of but it's pretty concentrated. And if you look at the last 7 seasons, 6 years. But yeah, 7 seasons. There's been no repeat champion. You had the Raptors in 2019, Lakers, Bucks, Golden State, Denver, Boston, Oklahoma City. And so let's look at this. I think this is really interesting. And this is something that I've thought about a lot. So what do these teams all have in common? Does this say something about what the NBA looks like now? To start with that, let's talk about the Kevin Durant Warriors, obviously, because that was kind of the dominant team right before this all started, this little mini era of the NBA of parity. And I think there was a real sense that was bad for the league that Kevin Durant went to the Warriors, because they just kicked everybody's ass. When they were healthy, which I obviously touched on in the first part of the video, there was no way you were going to beat them. And so that was boring. I think it made it really hard to be interested in the NBA as a fan. So I think that's part of the reason why we see this parity and why we don't see as much clustering together of stars. I think it's a big impetus of why we have the second apron. And I think also, you talk about Daryl Morey had this quote in 2018 after the Rockets lost to the Warriors in 7. He said, "I need to raise my risk profile to be able to beat this team." And I think you've seen that play out a little bit, where as a counter to that, teams have gone to this 2 stars in depth model of team building, rather than having it be more of a stars and scrubs NFL type of thing, where it's 3 awesome players and then you just kind of figure out the rest. And again, that obviously interacts with the second apron stuff, the kind of roster building constraints that the teams face now, which I think have been really successful. And so if you look at all of these teams and what they have in common, what's different about them, all of them except for now 2, the 2020 Lakers and the 2025 Thunder are the exceptions. All the other teams, so that's the 2019 Raptors, 2021 Bucks, 2022 Golden State Warriors, 2023 Denver Nuggets, and the 2024 Boston Celtics, had all been to the conference finals or the NBA finals in a previous season before they actually won the championship. The 2020 Lakers, they sucked the previous year when LeBron signed there. And then obviously they trade for Anthony Davis. They make all of these other changes to the depth of their roster. They completely changed their team. So that's the one case. The other one is Oklahoma City, who has this kind of once in a generation combination of young players and assets that they're using to build their team. And they were very, very close to making the conference finals last year. They had a very, very close series against the Mavericks, but they didn't make it through. So for that reason, I was kind of surprised that they won, because it goes against this little historical trend that's building. The other teams, they had a lot of continuity. Even the Raptors, who obviously traded for Kawhi, they didn't really have to trade that much to get him. And the main player who went out was DeMar DeRozan, and Kawhi kind of fit into DeMar DeRozan's role on the team. So they didn't make a huge change in that aspect. The structure of the team was the same. Golden State, they were obviously different from the way they had been in previous seasons, but it was still Steph, it was still Draymond, it was still Clay. Those are the guys who had been there the whole time, and they were still there. They were still the guys who set the culture of the team. So continuity is really important, and I think that teams are working with that understanding a lot more now, and I think that's leading to parity because all of these teams, it's weird because they kind of, the year after they win the championship, these teams don't seem to make really big changes. They don't really want to bring in a new presence to change the team because I guess because they're worried that they're gonna screw something up. But like, I don't remember where I first heard this, but that really helps to bring in a new person, to bring in a new player, somebody who's hungry, who hasn't won it before. This is what the Celtics did when they brought in Bill Walton, for example, is kind of the one that I was thinking of. You need to bring in a little bit of new blood, someone else who is hungry to get it for themselves. Bill Walton had, of course, won the title, but he had missed so much time with injury, and he was a completely different player at that point of his career. I think he was just really, really happy to be on a winning team and contribute to winning again, especially a team like that. So I think that's kind of an interesting aspect of this. Oklahoma City did kind of the same thing. They drafted Thomas Sorber, but they didn't make big changes. So I don't know. I think the kind of wrapping this all up with the continuity thing, I think teams have their own life cycle, like they rise and they hit their level and then they kind of need to reset. And I think that's what this is going to be like in going forward with the second apron. And I think the Nuggets are a great example of this. I think that their team was just really badly managed the last few years, but I think that they hit their peak with what their previous team was, and now they've kind of treaded water and kind of struggled the last couple of years. They have a new coach. They made a bunch of roster changes this season, which I really, really like. And then I wouldn't be surprised at all if they win the championship again. But that's kind of my, half coherent rambling thoughts about parity. I think it has a lot to do with continuity. Injuries are a factor, but it's not like Boston was going to win the championship again. They looked like crap against the Knicks. So parity is not the thing. And let's say Tyrese Halliburton didn't tear his Achilles, and the Pacers win Game 7. The Pacers would have been a new champion too. So that's not anti-parity. So I like the take, but I think it's wrong. And these are my reasons why. So thank you.